Hi, it's Andy, and this is the Tuesday discipleship video as we look at Romans 16, 1 and 2. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to focus in on one word, but then extract that and move to other thoughts about that word servant or deacon, diakonos being the Greek term, from this particular passage we reviewed on Sunday. Church leadership in general is a topic that can cause a lot of debate. And by church leadership, I don't mean the effectiveness of a leader or of a group of leaders within a church. That's its own story and its own debate. What I do mean is the type of leadership that a church may have. Now, many people may not think about this much, but most people who are a part of the church world will realize that there are different types of structures, of leadership structures and denominational structures within the overall church, capital C church. A better term for that structure is what is known as governance, and many books have been written on the various forms of governance, and most of those books have their own vantage point promoting their idea, although there are exceptions that promote the four main types of governance. And my goal today is not to talk about the different types of governance. Again, that would take a full book at minimum. But I want to focus on two offices within most churches, regardless of governance, that any church recognizes, even though the titles that are used within different churches might be a little bit different. One term that is pretty universally used is the idea of deacon. The other is the idea of elder, or what many churches call pastor. Now, many, and perhaps even most churchgoers, recognize a difference in title, but they don't truly understand the difference in the function. Scripture gives us some indication of those differences, but Scripture does not detail the specific differences in how these two offices, how these two titles should function. The main purpose in Scripture is to identify the character for each of these particular offices. Deacons are first mentioned in Acts chapter 6 when there was a problem with the distribution of food amongst the widows and orphans, and the apostles said, well, our goal needs to be, our focus needs to be on prayer and the study of the Word so that they could teach it effectively. So we need others to serve the church in this capacity. And the word that was used there is a word that means servant. Really, very specifically, it means someone who waits on tables. And so given the idea of the distribution of food being an issue, it was very well defined for this idea of deacons in Acts 6 was very well defined. The idea of elders is mentioned in a few places. Acts 20, Titus chapter 1. Acts 20 takes place in Ephesus. But in those, there are other places that happen as well. But the words that we find for elder can be a couple of different words that are synonymous with one another in Scripture. We have overseer, and we have pastor, and we have bishop. And again, some people might not like to consider the pastor of the church as a bishop if they're not from let's say, a Catholic background. But from a scriptural perspective, that would be an accurate title for me in that setting. It's just a matter of how individual denominations, how different governances interpret that idea. Well, again, some denominations have separated those terms to mean different things, and that started very early in church history, by the way. But it does not appear that a bishop was over a multitude of churches, at least not in the very earliest part of church history. Both terms, deacons and elders, however, are mentioned in a couple of passages together. The first that we find is Philippians 1:1, right at the end of that verse. In fact, some people call it Philippians 1:2, where they are mentioned together. And then 1 Timothy 3, they are mentioned just a few verses apart from one another. There is a paragraph about deacons that follows the paragraph about an elder. The verse in Philippians is important because it does indicate a difference in these two offices. Paul mentions both of these together in the same sentences, but he groups them together, showing that these are both a part of the same church as well as the inclusion of the saints. Now, I know I'm a little technical here, but this is important. In Timothy, however, Paul also writing this, as he did Philippians, in Timothy, he's writing to his young protege and helping him to understand who is qualified to be an elder in verses 1 through 7, and then also who is qualified to be a deacon in the paragraph to follow. And what we can notice is that there are similar traits between an elder and a deacon. The main difference we find in 1 Timothy 3:2 is that an elder should be able to teach. A deacon can serve without teaching, but an elder should be able to teach. So going back to Romans 16:1, we see that Phoebe is called a servant. And the Greek word here is diakonos, which is the same word that Paul used in Philippians 1:1 and in a couple of places in 1 Timothy 3, as I just mentioned. The word is often translated as minister as well, but it clearly applies to some people in a specific way, as Paul has noted in these texts. In Romans 16, it's also interesting that this word is in the masculine form, even though it is describing a female, and therefore this indicates that this is a special function, a special office, that this isn't just calling Phoebe someone who ministers in the church, but that she has a specific position within the church. Now, from my understanding of Scripture, deacons are to serve. The elders are to oversee, or therefore we might say to govern the church. Now, that doesn't mean that there is carte blanche in governance, but many churches do not function that way. And in fact, many deacons believe that they are the governing body, or should I say board, the governing board for the church. Now, Scripture does not provide any indication at all that that is the case. Although a part of serving the church could include certain functions like managing the finances and taking care of the property and those kinds of things, the property of a church building. But it should be done from an attitude of service, not control. In my opinion, Gene Getz says it best when he says, an elder serves best when leading, and a deacon leads best when serving. But one of the pressing questions of our day today is who can function as an elder or who can function as a deacon. As I mentioned a moment ago, 1 Timothy chapter 3 gives us some details, as does Titus chapter 1, but 1 Timothy 3 gives us details about an elder. 1 Timothy 3 also gives us details about the character of a deacon. Do those characteristics require that person be a male? Well, that's the subject of tomorrow's video. So check back with our Wednesday discipleship video this week, and I will try to answer that question based upon Scripture.